Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on how thinking exponentially helps drive business growth. We're delighted to have so many of you join us live, and I know you'll be glad that you did. My name is Heidi Lawrenson, and I am the Vice President of Marketing here at Singularity University and have the distinct privilege of moderating today's webinar. At Singularity University, we empower leaders with the mindset, the skill set, and the network to build breakthrough solutions that leverage emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, digital biology, just to name a few, to solve the world's biggest problems. Okay, so that's a little bit about Singularity University. Now tell us a little bit about you. We have a quick poll so that we can all see where everyone is coming from today. All right, so today we're excited to continue our Exponential Leadership webinar series that's all about sharing approaches to leading change in the midst of accelerating change. And in today's session, we'll explore the importance of adopting what we at SU call an exponential mindset, which is at the heart of enabling innovation and is a precursor to being able to design and lead an exponential organization. And we'll be saving 15 minutes to answer questions at the end of the webinar, but you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions. Please use the chat button that you see on the bottom of your screen to submit questions as they occur to you, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. All right, so we are incredibly fortunate this morning here in California to have my friend Mark Bonchek with us today. Mark is one of the foremost experts on exponential thinking, a way of thinking that we espouse here at SU, but not very well known or understood, nor how best to leverage. Mark is the founder and Chief Epiphany Officer, love that title, no ordinary CEO is he, of Shift Thinking, where Mark helps leaders and organizations update their thinking for a digital age. And I'm sure he'll be leaving us today with many epiphanies. As an advisor, entrepreneur, executive, and thought leader, Mark has developed a simple yet powerful way of thinking about how organizations can grow, engage, and organize. His clients include Accenture, Adobe, GE, SAP, and Staples. And he's a popular speaker, and you'll soon see why, as well as a regular columnist for Harvard Business Review, where he writes on strategy, marketing, culture, and leadership. It's an honor to have Mark here with us today, and I'm sure you'll be as delighted as I am that he's able to share his insights with us. So just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone on the call will be muted throughout the duration of the presentation to ensure that we have the best quality audio system for everybody. And during the presentation, if you should encounter any audio issues, though, please try refreshing your browser and check your computer's audio settings. We find that often will do the trick. If you continue to have any issues, just chat in the window, and we'll have somebody support you with that. And again, feel free to submit your questions anytime during the webinar, and just click the chat button to do so. And lastly, we are recording today's webinar, and we'll share that link after this call. That way you can listen to it again or even share with others who may be interested in it after you've heard all about that. Okay, so let's get started, and with that, I will turn it over to Mark. Take it away, Mark.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be with all of you today, and I just want to jump right into it and look forward to answering your questions towards the end, and we'll have some polling along the way as well. So really the premise for this session is on the observation that exponential technologies require exponential thinking. And in some sense, we can think about our mindsets as a technology in and of itself. You know, we have kind of conceptual tools and ways of thinking that we use to create value. And so it really is that partnership between my work around shift thinking and Singularity University, and how we can help all of you think exponentially as well as put exponential technologies into practice. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is helping you shift your thinking so that you can make the most of whatever you're harnessing exponential technologies to do in your organizations. And I want to start with this slide, which if we had time, we could do a whole poll to see if any of you know what this is a picture of. But it's actually a picture of downtown Boston, and it's called the Big Dig, which was one of the largest public works projects in history. And during that project, all of the highways that were above ground were put below ground into tunnels. And at the time, this is about 15 to 20 years ago, we didn't have smartphones yet. So these were the GPS devices that we used on our dashboard. And if you recall these, they came, they operated with the maps that they came with. And so what happened was, as the Big Dig was happening, there were detours and roads closed and everything else, and the GPS devices didn't work the way they used to because the maps hadn't been updated. And it really is kind of a metaphor for today of how we can navigate a changing landscape. And the answer to the Big Dig is really the same answer that we need to solve today, which is in order to navigate that changing landscape, we have to update our maps, because otherwise we just keep punching in new destinations and it still doesn't get us where we're going. And it really is a question of updating our mental maps in order to navigate the new landscape. And the old maps really don't work the way they used to. There's a wonderful quote from Albert Einstein: "We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And what that means is that with these new models and these new maps, it's not just a matter of adding the new maps on top of the old ones. If you think about it with a GPS device, or an app store update, whatever it is, you kind of have to uninstall the old app first. And it's the same thing here. We have to unlearn a lot of our old mental models. There are ways of working and operating that used to work, but they just don't work the same way anymore. And to give you a sense of kind of what that's like, if you've been in America and gone to England, or if you've been in England come to America, whichever way it goes, if you travel in a country where they drive on the opposite side of the road, you have to unlearn some things. I know I live in Boston, and when we were in Scotland a year ago and drove around, it really wasn't the driving on the left that was the hard part. It was not driving on the right. And that's a lot of where we are today, is we have to unlearn the familiar habits that we have. And to give you a sense of what that kind of looks like, and I like to say that change is a trapeze, and that we hang on to old models until the new ones appear within reach. And this whole world around exponential technologies and exponential thinking is like a new bar that we go to. But in that process of moving from the old to the new, we first start out by seeing the new through the lens of the old. That's the way that our minds work. And to give you an example of this, there are a lot of them, but I'll just pick one. If you think about when the combustion engine came about, and we had horse-drawn carriages. The first mechanical transportation devices, let's just say, were called horseless carriages. And you see this picture on the right, and it looks just like a horse-drawn carriage, except it doesn't have a horse. It has an engine, because our mental models were such that we kind of imagined transportation, ground transportation, looking like a horse-drawn carriage. And if you look very closely, you get something even more interesting. So if you see what he's actually steering this horseless carriage with, it looks like a tiller from a boat, because that's how we imagine steering. We kind of took a boat tiller and a horse-drawn carriage and put that together. And that's exactly where we are today. As you kind of can see, quote, horseless carriages all around, is we're looking at something that's new, but seeing it through the lens of the old. And we might use new words for it, but it's still old thinking. I mean, think about it this way, we call them digital wallets. Well, it's not a wallet at all. It's an app, it's software, but we kind of call it the equivalent of a horseless carriage. So as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about where we might be projecting old models onto new things. So let's take a look and see where this shift from the incremental to exponential came from, because these mental models are really deeply seated, and we need to be very thoughtful about catching where it has infused the way that we look at the world. And where this all comes from is that before the digital revolution, communication was one way. And this really goes back to Gutenberg and the printing press and all of the subsequent technologies of communication that were really one-way communication vehicles. And this is what shaped our way of thinking, because the way that we communicate shapes how we relate to each other. The way we relate to each other also shapes our identity, the way we organize, and the way we think about value creation. But then the audience started talking back, and kind of everyone got their own megaphone, and now we're adjusting to a world in which people can speak back to us as institutions one-on-one. But the real power is that now consumers are co-creators. And this is the many-to-many nature of the world we live in today. So it's not just the talking back to organizations, but being able to create new organizations that are not hierarchical and that are more reciprocal and networked. And it's that network evolution that underlies what we mean by the exponential mindset. And this is a picture, by the way, if you're not familiar, this is a Amish barn raising, which is in areas of Pennsylvania, the United States, and other areas. And here, if someone needs a new barn, they don't hire an architect and a general contractor. They build the barn together as a community. And to me, it's a metaphor for the new kinds of organizations that we see, which are in some sense barn raisings. Wikipedia, in effect, is a barn raising of an encyclopedia as opposed to the traditional kind of hierarchical megaphone-like Encyclopedia Britannica that it displays. So you might say that we've gone from a world of Gutenberg, or one-to-many, to a world of Zuckerberg, which is many-to-many. And it's that many-to-many property that enables the exponential change. So I want to show this short video that I think highlights a bit of this shift in thinking. So this first, we're going to look and see, this is kind of a incremental model that I call serial. It's kind of one at a time, one block at a time, and a lot of how we build things or think about value creation is this linear one at a time. Now, we can get very sophisticated in how we create kind of incremental models, and, compared, let's take the horseless carriage model. If that first block was the Model T in Ford, now you think about what a manufacturing plant looks like, or a lot of our organizations today. Very complex, and yet still kind of one domino at a time. So here's exponential.
We can see for ourselves what exponential growth looks like by doing a little experiment. So if we can bring one of the handheld cameras in, we can have a look at this.
That's right. I can narrate it. So
in this box, I have 225 armed mousetraps.
And
on each mousetrap,
kind of
we have a ping pong
ready to go.
Now, in a moment, we're going to take one more ping pong ball, and we're going to drop it in through this hole in the top, and it's going to set off a chain reaction. And in this chain reaction, the number of ping pong balls flying through the air is going to grow exponentially. Okay, so who would like to volunteer to come and set this off? Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, go! Amazing, excellent. Okay, thank you very much. So we have a high-speed camera that was looking at that, and perhaps we can just do a little action replay and see that in slow motion. So there's the first ball, setting off a couple more. Each of those is setting off several more. And on that curve, we can see the number of balls growing in this very dramatic way. And what's really impressive about exponential growth is that the rate of growth is itself growing exponentially.
What you see there is that many-to-many property, where it's not just a matter of each ping pong ball kind of tripping the next ping pong ball, but rather, any of them can trip any others, and you get that chain reaction. And that's really the core of what we're going for whenever there's an exponential effect, is the ability for something to affect lots of other things, and then for those things to affect other things as well. And so what I want to turn now is, we could do a whole session just on what we think of as normally as exponential technologies in a traditional sense. But what I want to think about is, in a broader sense, of exponential models of value creation. And so first let's take a look and see how some of the exponential technologies specifically demonstrate these exponential effects. Like I said, we can spend more time on kind of why and how that is, but I want to get to the more general model of value creation. So here's just a picture, a chart on the human genome. And what you see is even compared to Moore's law, you've got the cost of sequencing coming way down and the increasing rate of change, as you saw in the video, versus the human genome sequenced, increasing exponentially. Then we have and the Internet of Things. So you have sensors and an explosion of what they say connected possibility. So here's exponential connections, again, because each connected device can not only, quote, knock down the device next to it, but can connect with all the other devices around it. So again, it's that exponential effect. And then you can see here on artificial intelligence, or what I like to call augmented intelligence, I think is a more apt description. You've got growth in computing power and the way in which we're just starting to really see the bend in the curve of exponential change there. So that shows, and I think you've seen these kind of graphs before, that in the area of digital technologies that we're accustomed to these exponential changes. But here I want to kind of highlight areas where we don't always see exponential change. So here are number of new driver partners starting each month in the US for Uber. And interestingly, you get the same kind of exponential growth. Here we can look at PayPal, same kind of thing, growth of PayPal mobile payment, exponential increase. Here's Airbnb, number of guests staying with hosts during the summer. Again, exponential change. Instagram, same kind of thing, updated photos, exponential change. And so we can see this parallel between the possibilities of value creation in an enterprise and the kinds of digital technology effects that we see around the human genome, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. And the reason for that is because that same many-to-many effect, that network effect, is taking place around organizations as they are around technologies. And this is some really great research that Barry Liebert and his colleagues have done that's published in Harvard Business Review. And at the end, by the way, or in the follow-up, we'll be sending around a link. If you just sign up from the link, we'll be able to send you links to this research, the original video that you saw, and a lot of other relevant things. So be sure you follow up to do that so you can get more information. So this research looked at using, by the way, using machine learning and AI techniques, which we saw before, looked at organizations and their financial returns, but also all the different kinds of capital that companies have. So human capital, intellectual capital, physical capital, financial capital, social capital. And it was able to map what their capacity for value creation is. What is the core of the mental model, the business model, the measurement model? And then you could type them into, are they predominantly an asset builder where they focus on things? Are they, that should be 2.0, by the way, right on the top there. Service provider, are they focused on people and delivery of services, technology creator, or a network orchestrator? And what you can see is a fundamental difference in the average multiplier, the price to revenue ratio here you see, and it almost is exponential here from 2.0, 2.6, 4.8, 8.2. And the same thing holds for profitability and growth rates. And so what this says is not only are companies that are leveraging an exponential growth model and a network effect more successful, but they're also rewarded with more success in the market. And so that's where you get that multiplier. And what we believe it says is that there is a not only a difference in the business model. This is in an article we can send you afterwards also. This is not only a difference in the business model and the measurement model, but actually the underlying mental model. And that when you put all those three things together, you get a completely different structure and capacity for value creation. And so what I want you to kind of think about it for your organization is, are you more focused on kind of thinking about your business as assets, or as services, or as technology, or as networks. And again, this isn't necessarily your business model. In one of the pieces we'll send you after, we looked at the airline industry, and what you'll see is that Southwest Airlines, for example, looks like it has an asset-based business model, just like other traditional carriers. But their mental model is really one of a services business. So they think about themselves as being in the customer service business, and they happen to fly airplanes. So you can have a different mental model than you have than your competitors, and that's really where you want to focus, is creating that kind of exponential thinking. So we've got our first, I know this is just a very quick introduction, and I encourage you to explore this further, but we just want to take a quick poll to kind of get a pulse on where all of you are, of whether you see your business as being more kind of asset, service, technology, or network-based. Are you focused on things, people, technology, tools, intellectual property would be technology, or networks is really fundamentally about relationships and the way that you can kind of enable others and monetize relationships. So just take a quick second, and which value model best describes your business? Asset, services, technology, or networks? Give that a second to come in. I think what the power of this suggests is once you start to separate your mental and business from the business model, you have an opportunity to pursue transformation in a way that doesn't require you to initially get into an entire different business or industry. You can start with the industry you have or the business you have and start to transform the thinking and to apply some of this exponential approach. So let's see what the results look like here. So just short of half are in the services predominantly, and then some in technology, quite a few, and that's great, in the networks as well. And I'm sure that there are, there's kind of hybrids, and oftentimes companies have different parts of the business or in different areas, but the key thing there is what that mental model is, and also the measurement model, which we're going to come back to shortly as we look there. That's great, so thank you for that. Now what we want to look is, how do you start putting this exponential mindset and exponential model of value creation into practice? Because I think we've all have the scars to show that it's not easy, right? And these old ways of thinking are they're kind of tricky. In some ways, they're insidious. We kind of do things without even noticing. So it's hard enough for ourselves once we say that we want to pursue an exponential agenda, but it becomes even more difficult when we have to get others on board. So this is last section, and then we're going to open up for questions. It's going to look at what does it take to actually drive exponential change. And the core of this is to look and say, well, there are really two paths of innovation. One is, we're going to call it incremental, and one is exponential. And the way to tell which one you're on is, if you look at one axis along the bottom, you see is time, and one axis is results vertically. With incremental, if you're halfway through in time, you have, let's say, half the results. Whereas the cornerstone of exponential is that in the beginning, your results don't come along as rapidly as time does, but it accelerates later on. So things can happen kind of slower at first and faster later because the rate of change changes. Incremental has a constant rate of change. Exponential has an accelerating rate of change. So that's the key aspect, which is reflected in the curves. So let's take a quick poll just to see kind of where you are in this journey on exponential. So are you currently engaged in a project that aspires, sorry for the typo there, that aspires to be exponential? So either you're actively underway in something, you're in the planning stage of an exponential project, you're not currently, but you'd like to be, or you're not currently, but you don't expect to be. So this is still kind of an area of interest, but nothing specifically that you're pursuing that you would consider an exponential initiative or program or project or business model or anything else. I thought it would be helpful for us to just get a sense. I think we can still see the results, so let's see here. Okay, great. This is very interesting. So about a fifth of you actively underway, 2/5 in the planning stage, and another 2/5 that would like to be. Great. All right, so that'll, you can keep voting if you want. All right, I think we've got everybody in. Excellent. So I want to focus on 3 of the gaps. For those of you that are underway, hopefully this will maybe help explain a little bit of what you're finding and match it. And for those of you who are planning, I hope this helps so that you can put the right conditions into place. And this first one is what I call the vision gap. And the key to this is that hopefully you can kind of see that dotted line across the top there. When we're in an incremental model, we set goals based on what we can see. You have line of sight to your goal. And it seems like that, well, that would be obvious, is that you want to be able to see what your goal is. But in reality, with an exponential model, you don't necessarily see the goal because you almost can't. So in an incremental, we see the goal, but with an exponential, it's almost like these are supposed to be clouds, kind of cloud cover, and you can't see above the clouds. So you're kind of shooting for something, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. You know, when Bezos started Amazon, you know, he could kind of have line of sight, let's say, into selling books online, but the full potential of selling online, he reflected in that, you know, A to Z. If you've ever noticed, that's what the logo in Amazon is, kind of the smile connecting A to Z. And the name itself was Amazon of everything. He couldn't fully see everything that it would be. And in fact, the real growth has come from areas that weren't foreseen. Amazon Web Services, for example. And so that's the first dimension of this around the vision gap is that you need to have goals in some sense that you can't see. And that's hard for most organizations who are accustomed to having line of sight to where the goal is. So that's the first gap, is that vision gap. And we're going to come back at the end and talk about how you manage with others where that's the case. But let's put that on pause for a moment and let's look at the 2 other gaps. So the second gap is what I call the expectation gap. And this is, I find, the most difficult, meaning, you know, the vision gap, you can give people specific line of sight goals and you can just hold the use your imagination to envision something bigger. So you can kind of get through the vision gap pretty well. But the expectation gap is where I find that most of these projects really bog down. And the problem here is that as you're building the network effect that's going to kick in later to create the exponential change, oftentimes you kind of start slower than you would otherwise in an incremental model. And you kind of see that reflected here with that exponential orange line underneath the incremental line. And so you get the critique from others, which is, well, we're kind of off to a really slow start. You know, what's going on? And then you get a little farther, and then even if you start to see a little bit of that uptake, then it's still kind of behind the incremental line, so to speak, what people would have expected if you had just started driving for results. And then the question is, will it ever catch up? And this is where I find a lot of the exponential projects get shut down, unfortunately, right as they would be just about to pick up steam. And so this becomes the dilemma of kind of which path are we on? And you might have full confidence that the line is going to start to bend and you're going to exceed the incremental, but it's hard to prove that you're not just going to be on that incremental line and stay linear and never get better than the incremental. And so oftentimes what will happen is the critics or the incremental thinkers will say, you know, we've given you all of this time and you still aren't, you know, getting a lot of results. We're going to reallocate the resources back over to where there's kind of the predictable success of the incremental. And so what this looks like then is that it becomes really critical to put in place what I call exponential metrics. And the exponential metrics are what are going to determine which path you're on, and so you know which path you're on. Do you really get the exponential network effects that you're going for? So we're accustomed to having incremental metrics, which tell us, are we making progress against our immediate goals? We've got that covered really well. But the measurement model, to my earlier point, and the metrics that we need are answering the question, are we generating the necessary conditions for a network effect? Are we putting into place what we need to put in place so that we know that that arrow is going to bend upwards and accelerate and not just kind of stay below the green line, if you will? And I think that you can see this. I mentioned Amazon before, and I think they're a really good example of this. If you go back, if you don't read, by the way, if you don't read Bezos's shareholder letters, they're really excellent. They're kind of, I know everyone looks at Warren Buffett's. I think Bezos's letters are going to kind of move into that same category. But if you go back to the original one in the 1997, he said, because of our emphasis on the long term, we may make decisions and weigh trade-offs differently than some companies. So he didn't say we're an exponential business and therefore we're going to be creating metrics and doing things that are different than incremental businesses. But in some sense, that is what he's saying. And if you were to look at how other retailers measure their results, they look at overall sales and they look at basket size and they look at markup, and the classic retailer model is year over year same store sales, for example. But what Amazon has always looked at are, first of all, 80% of their metrics are what they call customer facing rather than internally facing, which is unusual. But they also have been very careful to look at their success based on things like, in the beginning, how many affiliates were signing up to sell things on the platform, or how many online reviews were they generating. And they did a lot of work to really incentivize people to create those reviews, because that was what was going to really pull people in, not just whether there was 10% off today, but whether there were the reviews that enabled people to make the best choice of their product. And then more recently, after the Prime was launched, how are they doing on signing up new members, not just customers and transactions, but members? And now they look at how many different kinds of touch points do those members engage in. So not just are they shopping, but are they streaming media, for example? And are they using Kindles and Amazon Echoes and all of the other things that again reflect the fact that there's now a network effect in being an Amazon customer with other customers through online reviews and so on, but also with the whole portfolio of those products and services. So very different metrics that have been telling Amazon that they're building the network effect. And the thing that I really encourage you to be thinking about is what are the metrics that could tell you whether or not you're really on that exponential path and that you're going to get the bend that you're looking for versus you're on just a slow start. So now let's take a look at the third gap, and that's what I call the resource gap. So assuming that you've been successful and you've made it through the vision gap and you've made it through the expectation gap and you've got the metrics in place that have enabled you to optimize what you're doing in a way that creates that network effect, then this is the proverbial what happens when the dog actually catches the car. Now you've got an exponential effect happening. And now your problem is, how do you keep up? How do you resource against exponential growth? And we've seen companies that have struggled with this, where they don't, they are kind of the victims of their own success. And if you have an incremental approach to resourcing, a linear approach to resourcing, you'll fail, because you can't throw enough people or assets at the problem in order to staff up. You're going to have to use technologies, you're going to have to use communities, you're going to have to use these other vehicles that support exponential results. And in some sense, that's a little bit like Amazon Web Services was an exponential technology to enable Amazon to achieve that kind of growth. Their use of robotics in the warehouses exponential technology because you couldn't throw enough people at the problem to pick the things off the shelf. So this is really where a lot of the exponential technologies that Singularity talks about become really critical because they enable you to actually pursue these exponential strategies successfully, since you're not just dealing with just physical and kind of people-based resources. So let's take a look with a quick poll and kind of see where you are, for those of you who are underway, or if you're just planning on one, what do you think that the greatest hindrance would be in your organization? Is the hindrance that there's a vision gap, that people can't see the kind of bold vision and they just want to stay in, shorter term, more immediate results of what they're looking for? Is it that you can get people to kind of dream big, but then they revert to just wanting to see kind of steady progress, it's been 3 months, where are your results? Well, we're building the platform. Well, what are your sales? Or, well, we're designing and engaging people in the community that's going to deliver that robust engagement later on. Yeah, well, where's the latest campaign and promotion? Is it a resource gap? Is that going to be the problem? Is that you're not putting into place the infrastructure that you would need in order to achieve that growth? Or do you have those things that you think that there's a metrics gap, that you're doing the right stuff, but you're not measuring the right thing? So let's see what that looks like here. Oh, interesting. Okay, great. So, about close to a third on vision and a third on expectation, and then the rest is kind of mixed between the resource gap and the metrics. That's great. Very interesting. Okay, good. So just going to finish up with a few more slides here, and then we're going to open it up because I'm sure we've got some great questions. And this is really about how you manage this. And I like to say that you really need to be thinking about being ambidextrous. It's not either or. So it's not that you either are exponential or you're incremental. You need to be both. And so in the beginning, you want to be ambidextrous in that you can have that long-term vision, that bigger vision, but then you also need to bring that down into the near-term goals. So I'm just going to use Amazon again because we've been using the example here. There it was, all right, we're going to focus on books initially, but we also have the vision of something bigger. And sometimes I see people try to, like they say, boil the ocean. They just become the big long-term vision, but they don't give people in the organization enough of the near-term value, and so they can't get people on board. Or you only have the near-term goal and it stays stuck there and you don't have the long-term vision. So you need to be ambidextrous in the beginning. And then in the middle, you need to be ambidextrous in terms of how you show progress. So you kind of need to keep the incrementalists happy, would be the way I would describe it, is making sure that you do enough of the initiative that you can show that linear progress, just so people can kind of feel comfortable that, yes, we're making good progress, there's a goal, we're making progress, and then they will come on board once you start to get that accelerating rate of return on it. But in the beginning, they need to see the progress sooner rather than later. And meanwhile, in parallel, you're working on building that network effect that's going to give you that accelerating rate of return. And again, I often see kind of that, hey, we're off doing this great thing of platforms and networks and communities and digital and data and all of the things that are kind of in this exponential mindset, but they don't take care enough, and it's kind of a trust me, the results will come. People need to see a little more than that. So that's kind of the art in the middle of the ambidextrous before things start to pick up speed. And then once they do pick up speed, you have to be ambidextrous in how you manage the organization, because the incremental models are more hierarchical, management models. It's more about control and process and rules and procedures. And exponential models require much more distributed decision-making and empowerment. And so you have to be able to govern and manage and lead in a networked model alongside the more hierarchical traditional approach. And when if you register afterwards and from the follow-up for us to send you more stuff, we'll send you some links about how to think about this more networked approach to management and growth. But this is the nature of the ambidexterity, is being able to both have a linear control but also a distributed empowerment. So let's kind of see where we've been and wrap up, and then we'll turn over to questions. What you want to do kind of as a next step is identify where you think you have the greatest exponential opportunities. And I think the kind of asset service technology network model is a good example of that. You can also think about where you can create network effects. Where can you connect customers with each other, partners with each other, employees with each other, your products with each other? That's a huge area in terms of Internet of Things. Where can you have your products connecting with each other? Where can you connect data sources together? Again, exponential is all about network effects, which is all about relationships and networks. So then you want to make sure that your team is well versed in exponential thinking, because if they don't have this mindset, they're going to be looking at the world through that incremental lens. Even if they're using the language and they're talking the talk of exponential, they're still going to be thinking incrementally, and it's going to come back and be a problem. And then you want to get really clear as a team of what are those dynamics, what are those network effects, how is value going to be created by connecting things together, what is that kind of, if you remember in the video, the collection of the mousetraps and the ping pong balls, what is it that you're building there? And then how will you measure success? How will you know whether or not you're building the capacity for that ping pong effect, for that exponential effect to take off? So you know you're not just kind of in a suboptimal incremental path, but you're actually going to accelerate the rate of change. And then what is the strategy that you will use in order to kind of keep the incrementalists happy, to be quite honest? How can you make sure that until they start to see those results, that they feel that you're making good progress? And how do you include them and ideally bring them along into exponential ways of thinking as well? So just to summarize, this is what I've seen over and over again, that in times of transformation, before we can change what we do, we first have to change how we think. I'd be very cautious that many of us grew up in a world of, quote, best practice, where you can see what other people are doing, it's working for them, and so you borrow it and bring it over to what you're doing, and you kind of copy what they're doing. And what I would want to leave you with is, don't just copy what people are doing. What you want to really copy is how they're thinking. And when you copy how they're thinking and apply it into your context, it'll lead you to do new things that might be different than what they're doing, but they're coming from the same place. And fundamentally, I think that's what this is about today, is you want to copy exponential thinking and apply it into your own exponential doing. So with that, let's take a look at your questions, and I look forward to hearing what you've got.
Love that, Mark. Thank you so much, and really appreciate you co-creating today's session with us at Singularity University to help us share more exponentially our mission and point of view about what it really takes to have a proactive role in building a future. Having seen your slides, now I'm always going to look at the Amazon smile as the beginning of an exponential curve and not just a smile. Based on the nature of the questions and the quantity of questions that have come in already, I think we do have a number of exponential thinkers in the crowd, and I think you're going to have a fun time answering some of these questions. And for those of you who have not yet asked questions, there is still time, but if we're not able to get to it, we will follow up later with everyone individually with an answer. So Mark, the questions have been falling into a couple of about 4 buckets as I've been tracking them. One around the leader or the person, the role that the person plays in this. Another is more broadly around the concept of driving the change. Another bucket around sort of the definition and really what exponential is. And then a couple of questions around the application of exponential thinking. So I'm going to start with one of the leader questions. Aidan asks, how closely linked is the concept of exponential thinking connected with the theory of leader ego development? In other words, does exponential thinking depend on or equate with the stage of the ego or the personality maturity?
Wow, that's a great question. I see we're not starting with the easy one. You know, it's very interesting. I would say kind of, you know, yes and no, meaning I think that there are ways of getting some exponential effects that don't necessarily require a more mature model on leadership, in that if you're just focused on kind of exponential technologies, you know, you could build a very successful Internet of Things business that's connecting sensor-enabled products together, and you know, build a great technology platform. You could create a lot of wealth creation that way, a lot of value creation, kind of probably sell it off to someone or deliver a great exponential kind of product or service. If it's just at the layer of the technology, where I think it requires, and you could do that in a traditional top-down, you could have a narcissistic CEO running that business, not a problem. Where I think you run into trouble is when it starts to become an exponential business model, and it requires an exponential kind of organization where people are involved. And to the extent that people are involved and that they need to be operating as a community, as a barn raising, right? You can take kind of the Amish, talk about a non-ego kind of place. That's where you kind of need to have a more mature kind of leader, because as I mentioned in that resource gap, that's where you have to have a different kind of organization, where you are empowering people to make decisions, where you are giving up some kind of control. The article that we'll send you later is how can leaders let go without losing control? And that's the place that there takes a different kind of leader in order to empower others to be able to take action effectively, and effectively the people become the ping pong ball.
Right. And so transitioning from this question sort of transitions from the leader role to the driving change. Luke is asking, so how do you help your team to shift their thinking?
Yeah, so another great question. So I'll be sure we include, there's an article I did, I do a column in Harvard Business, and there's a piece that I'll include in that based on that question. But the thumbnail of it is, in terms of shifting thinking, is one is, you have to reveal the mental model that people are using. That's the first step, is because normally we're unconscious. So things like this, I find it very helpful to just say, well, wait a minute, are we thinking about this incrementally or exponentially? So just right there is critical, so people can see, wait a minute, I'm on the old bar, I need to jump to the new bar. So one is revealing the old mental model and then creating the new one, or I like to say it's the Chicken Little problem. It's one thing to say the sky is falling, but you have to show people how to build the roof, or else you're just kind of scaring them, but they're not going to let go of the old bar until the new one's within reach. And then once you've got that, you have to identify whether or not they see the problem you see. If they see the problem, do they see the solution you see? And if they see the solution, do they see the roadmap to get there? And I'll often see people advocating for the benefits of their solution when the person they're talking to doesn't first see the problem and they don't think that there's a problem. And in which case they might think your solution is a great solution, but they don't think that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So reveal the old mental model, give them a new mental model, and then make sure you're aligned around showing the problem, showing the solution, and then showing the roadmap. That's the headline answer on that question.
Right, great. And this next one's somewhat related to that, and I think it ties to what you were saying earlier about keeping the incrementalists happy. Raphael notes that isn't there some value to building an easy step from an old model to a new one? Does it make it easier to adopt major disruptive changes by clothing them in artifacts that feel familiar and easy to use?
Oh, it's a great question. So yes, the trick is that you don't kind of get co-opted yourself. So you want to be sure that you're still building towards the bigger vision. But I definitely recommend, the artifacts like do the horseless carriage first. Going around, initially, there's a very funny one. I think it was the Morgan Car Company. They literally produced a car that had a fake horse head on the front because people were so freaked out by these machines running around that they had a fake horse head on the front so that people would kind of be comfortable with what it was. And the same thing of talk about the equivalent of the horseless carriage first. I'm making a note. I'll include in the links a link to Steve Jobs. We're right at the kind of the 20th anniversary of the announcement of the iPhone. And what he did is he came out and he said, today we're going to be introducing 3 new products, and everyone went nuts. He said, we're going to introduce a widescreen iPod, a touchscreen iPod, a breakthrough phone, and an internet communicator. And then he said, these 3 products are one product, introducing the iPhone. And what it did was it enabled people to kind of see this through the lens of what they already knew. And ironically, the internet communicator is the feature that was the most revolutionary, but that got the least applause because people didn't know what it meant. They went nuts over the iPod and pretty nuts over the iPhone feature. So cloaking it in something that is familiar to them is really helpful. And I always like to say, kind of find things that are 1 foot in the old, 1 foot in the new. So that kind of, digital wallet, horseless carriage, very helpful so that people have some way of understanding that that it's not entirely new, but it's not what they already know.
Excellent. You commented earlier about the importance of leveraging technology to help drive exponential change. Maria Sol is asking, should we assume that is the only way to grow exponentially is through technology? Is it possible to grow exponentially with a different path? And another question from Dan is somewhat related. He's saying that all the network models that he can think of that are successful are primarily market makers. But how does this model apply to something like strategy consulting? So the question is, is there a non-technology path to growing exponentially?
Yes. Well, it doesn't have to be your product, but I think you're going to need to use technology. One of the ones and it doesn't have to be in the whole business model as a market maker, so that's a good question. One company that I point to that I think really does a great job of using exponential models in terms of their customer engagement is Sephora. So they're a retailer that sells makeup, but the way that they've engaged their customer is highly leveraged in terms of building online communities, using social media, what happens in the store, the way that they're able to deliver services using augmented reality to try things on, just using your phone. So using technology really effectively, but they're still selling makeup. So they haven't switched to a platform-based business model, but they're leveraging platforms in a traditional supply chain model. And in terms of strategy consulting, I think we're going to see a huge disruption there. Back to the work that Barry Liebert had done around the shift to the network-based business models. That's all done with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think it's potentially very disruptive to some of the areas like strategy consulting where you're using humans to try to kind of diagnose and recommend strategies for companies. I think you'll see a lot of it. That's not necessarily market making, but it's kind of a new kind of automation in any of the advisory spaces. So that'll be law and accounting and others where it's humans doing that. Just like it's like precision medicine. Just like the Watson's already better at reading X-rays than radiologists, we'll see the same thing for most of the other professions.
Great. It's a shame we only have a couple minutes left. The amazing questions are still coming through, but again, we will follow up individually. I'm going to jump ahead to a couple of questions that are that people have asked around application of exponential thinking, and two people have commented on climate change in particular. And Santano is asking, does climate change require an exponential response? And Madeline is asking, how can exponential thinking be applied to support exponential transformative solutions to support global sustainability? Love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and just in the interest of time, so the answer is yes. It's the only way this is going to happen, and probably this may be a good story to we may need to end on. So around the turn of the century, there was the equivalent of climate change problem, and it was called the Great Manure Crisis. And I'm very serious about this. You can look this up, and I'll include that on my the links as well. Because there were population problems, there were so many horses in cities around the world that the cities were literally clogging up with horse manure. And there was a conference where people came from all over the world to try to figure out what to do about the manure crisis. And it was supposed to be a week-long conference, and they literally went home after 3 days because they were so distraught that there was no solution for the manure crisis. Well, as we all know, the automobile came along and solved the manure crisis, in a sense, exponentially. Now we're in another kind of problem, which is how do we solve the crisis that brought about? I mean, to me, we should be pouring everything we possibly can into exponential technologies. I mean, nuclear fusion is fundamentally an exponential technology because it's looking at the interconnections of things. And there are a lot of other things that we could be looking at, but I don't see enough that's looking at exponential energy technologies. We're still kind of trying to solve it the way they were trying to solve the manure crisis.
Great. Manure was not the way I thought we might end this webinar, but that is a great and memorable example. Thank you, Mark, so much for today. And again, based on the number of additional questions that we have, clearly there's lots of interest in this, and we'll continue the dialogue. So I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. If you do have any additional questions, please send an email to info@su.org, and not .org. I just noticed a typo there. And we, as promised, will be sending you both the link to this webinar as well as some of the articles that Mark mentioned. And a number of you have also expressed interest in having additional conversations about how we might be able to help you here at SU, and we'll be following up on that. So thank you again, Mark, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.